Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into a brand new edition of the Smoak Break here in week one of the college football season. Just a few minutes on Tuesdays and Thursdays while you're going out to grab some lunch and just get a breath of fresh air from the office building. We're here to help fill that time and maybe bring you a laugh or some insight or two a couple times a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays here on the Smoak Break College Football Channel. Under the umbrella of 365 Sports. I'm Craig Smoak, got Garrett Ross, amongst others, behind the scenes helping make this show happen, and we do appreciate you for tuning in, and we have arrived. We got a little taste test last weekend, Farmageddon on the menu, and it was a little tough to chew on initially, but eventually a pretty fun game there at the end that saw Iowa State get a massive victory to start off Big 12 play and the season itself. Now, want to know the Cyclones, but this weekend is the full 5-course meal. Hell, it's a 7-10-course meal when you look at the schedule in full. Tons and tons of games and more than a handful of absolutely massive games on a national level, but also on conference levels as well. Earlier this week on 365 Sports, we gave our picks on a handful of the biggest games in the country. I'll go back over those for myself in just a moment, but I do want to start off talking about the word opportunity, because the opportunity was huge last weekend for Iowa State and Kansas State to have the platform that they did. The opportunity will be huge on Thursday night, later on tonight, as we do this show, for the number of teams that will be playing, and we'll get into some of those games. The opportunity on Friday night is absolutely gigantic for a team like Baylor as they play host to Auburn with so many bells and whistles. I don't know if there's a marketing scheme they haven't attached to this football game, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but between the drone shows, the blackout uniforms, the blackout crowd, all of the things in between, they've piled as much on their plate as humanly possible, and a win would not only be delicious, but, man, it would be satisfying if you're Baylor. And there's various examples like that across the country. And when you break it down to a conference level, which I don't always love to do because I do feel as though realignment has created some territorial kind of attitudes towards college football that are understandable, but also kind of frustrating. Realignment throwing everything in flux, and so everybody's constantly watching their back, wondering who's going to stab them when they're not looking, wondering who's going to jump ship in the middle of the night when they're not looking, then wondering who's just going to help represent them and what they're trying to represent at that time. So for a bunch of schools, that is, for example, the Big 12 Conference. So for the Big 12, there's a lot of pride, a lot of opportunity out there. Same thing for the ACC, who feels like their cage is constantly being rattled. And the Big 10 and the SEC don't have much to worry about, but they do love bragging rights as much as anybody, especially those in the Southeastern Conference who kind of spawned the whole bragging rights thing. So a lot of times now you see conversations being broke down into conference conversations, and that's understandable because of the money flowing and just the bigger picture ramifications and the uncertainty of what's to come here in the next 5 years or so, with more realignment, new TV deals, creating new storylines involving movement and things of that nature. But in the meantime, with the expanded playoff and the money grab going on, you got to do what's best with what you got right now. And so for the Big 12 schools, they are as ironclad and as tight as they've ever been in their 20-plus year history. And so it's created a fun but very tribal sort of backing for people in the Big 12 footprint to want this conference to represent itself as best as it possibly can. And so ACC fans, Big Ten fans, they all feel that to a certain degree as well. We know how the SEC feels about pounding their chest and chanting the conference names, which is in some ways just in retaliation to people poking at them on a bigger scale. But point being, there are some bragging rights out there. There's some narratives that you can set. There's some storylines to take advantage of in week number one, especially if you're a league like the Big 12 that's constantly asking for and demanding respect. But it goes for the rest of the leagues as well. And I do believe that there are some outcomes that could occur here in the first couple of weekends that you're then hearing about in a major way when it comes to playoff conversation at the end of the year. Looking back on the strength of the Big 12, for example, well, what will you look back on? You look back on the records of the teams in the standings at the end of the year and who some of the teams where they beat in the conference. But what will be a tiebreaker determining factor in a lot of cases when you're pairing a Iowa State, for example, versus South Carolina, will be the conference strength argument, who'd you beat in the non-con, things of that nature. And so it's imperative that the ACC goes and wins as many big games as they can. So at the end of the year, if there is a debate, they can sneak in that second or third teams. Same thing on down the line. And for the Big 12, there is opportunity all over the place here in the non-con. And so I want to talk about them a little bit because we've discussed on 365 Sports and even on the first edition of this podcast the magnitude of that Baylor-Auburn game. That is a game where I feel like Auburn, the slight favorites out in Vegas, I know that last time I looked, but I feel like that's been kind of the general consensus in looking around the lay of the land. And so huge game in Waco. You can feel like all of the just activity in the city. The last couple of days they're getting ready for that. But that's an absolutely massive game for the Big 12 on a standalone Friday night practically to sit there and grab some spotlight. But it doesn't end there. You've got as well later on tonight as we talk about this, Cincinnati and Nebraska. Scott Satterfield, we know from talking to him at Big 12 Media Days, feels great about his football team. We talked to Matt Rule a couple days ago. He feels great about his football team. They certainly have the advantages, that being the Cornhuskers and money and backing and history and things of that nature. But Brendan Sorsby is a great quarterback, and I think, or a really good quarterback. I don't want to throw around the word great too much, but a really good quarterback. And man, if Cincy were to sit there and throw a curveball at Nebraska and pull off the upset, can you imagine? I mean, first of all, if you relish in the embarrassment of teams like Nebraska when they fall to a Cincinnati, for example, like you'll get your kicks just off that. But if you also happen to have some skin in the game and you want Cincinnati to do well, that could be an absolutely great win for that program, but for the league as a whole. You've also got Georgia Tech and Colorado. Georgia Tech, a team that many people are talking about as being a possible playoff team. And there's Colorado, who gets a ton of attention because of their head coach and their former quarterback and their former Heisman Trophy winner in Travis Hunter. But the latter two are gone. Deion still there, brought in some really talented players. I feel like Colorado's kind of under the radar a little bit, that people assume with the loss of Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, and yes, some very talented wide receivers, that they might take some huge step back from what was not even a 10-win team. I think you can very realistically feel strongly about them winning 7 or perhaps 8 games and maybe even more if things fall the right way. They should have a pretty good O-line. They should have more of a running threat in the backfield with Caden Salter. They should have a pretty strong defense, and I think they'll be a team that you don't really worry about them having wide receivers each and every year, because that's going to be something that they're pretty strong with. So Colorado, a team that's maybe flying under the radar, and one way to really kick up that hype machine, especially the one that backs the likes of a Deion Sanders, is to go and beat Georgia Tech in the early part of the season in the opening week. So Colorado versus Georgia Tech, Baylor versus Auburn, Cincinnati versus Nebraska. How about Utah trying to get back to the promised land? And it's strange when you hear Utah talk about Utah. It's strange when you hear others talk about Utah. You would think that they won like 10 Pac-12 titles in a row. You would think they'd been to multiple playoffs. They've been a very successful football program, one of the better football programs top to bottom in comparison to the rest of the teams in the Big 12, but they're not light years beyond the top handful of teams in my estimation, even though a portion of the fan base seems to think that they are in blue blood status, but I won't hold that against them. Point being, there's been a lot of talk. There's not been much walk, but there is some strong strides potentially to be made this year for Utah, and certainly some of the pundits feel like they are going to be a team that bounces back in a major way, primarily because of last year just being sort of an aberration, but also the additions of guys like Devin Dampier. So what do they have? UCLA, Nico Iamaleava, Deshaun Foster and company out there on Westwood, a team that not a lot of people are talking about in the Big Ten discussion, but a team that is of interest, particularly because of said quarterback. And so a big opportunity there with a former Pac-12 foe for the Utah Utes against the UCLA Bruins. And of course, then to cap off the weekend, you've got TCU and North Carolina. No shortage of storylines surrounding North Carolina this offseason, with Bill Belichick coming over to take that job. And quite frankly, I don't even have an earthly idea of what to expect from North Carolina early on. We know the players, we know the schemes that we've seen from Belichick and company before, but as far as what all that's going to look like on the field, no earthly idea. But I feel really great about TCU this season. I feel like they're going to be a strong contender in the Big 12, and I think they can make some noise, and I think that will include starting off the season 1-0 with a win against North Carolina on Monday night to close out the season. And so Point being, with all these narratives about conferences and conference strengths and who belongs where and who deserves what, there's a really simple way to reinforce your argument or to prop up your argument or to solidify your argument, and that's to go out there and win games that matter. And then when the discussion comes up and you're debating who needs 2 teams in, who deserves 3, who could possibly even have 4, well, let's take a look at their strength of schedule. Let's take a look at who they beat in the non-conference. For the Big 12, a handful of major games on this opening week 1 where you can go out and make a statement. A great spotlight shown on Farmageddon, and yes, I'm going to call it that, along with the rest of the sane people out there, no matter what whoever it is that's in charge is trying to dissuade people from talking about that name. We're all going to use it out of protest. And so Farmageddon last week, a great platform for the league. Kansas roughing up Fresno State. Good look there, as they may be a team that we're talking a lot about moving forward, a lot more than maybe we expected. But we could really be talking about some big things if the likes of a Cincinnati, a Colorado, a Baylor, and so forth can go and handle their business. Those are the biggest games coming up this week, and I don't think BYU demolishing Portland State or West Virginia and Rich Rod's big return is going to do much when they crush Robert Morris. But if Cincinnati were to go and beat Nebraska, well then, buddy, then you're talking about something completely different, and you're starting to have to go, okay, wait a second here. If Cincinnati's winning a game like that, what does that mean about them? And then so on and so forth. The dominoes fall in the discussion. But, man, really looking forward to seeing what kind of record comes out of a weekend like this. And this can be applied across the country when you look at the big non-con opportunities. I mean, I mentioned North Carolina. It'd be a big deal for Bill Belichick in his first game to go and beat a TCU. You have a Miami Notre Dame type of game as well, even though that's almost an ACC conference game in some ways. That's a huge game with a spotlight if Miami were to win that game. Georgia Tech, can they beat Colorado? If so, that would be a huge win for them, even though some people not expecting a ton out of the Buffaloes. And this can be applied throughout the rest of the leagues. Virginia Tech, South Carolina, another ACC game. And of course, you've got the likes of your Clemson versus LSU. So I love this time of year when you get these big non-con games. And I think while the tribalism can be a little bit tiring, it does provide a neat little kind of challenge almost unofficially for these leagues in these early weeks to put up a 4-3 record against Power 5 opponents, or to be able to say that you were 4-1 on opening weekend and everybody but Cincinnati got a win, meaning that you beat 4 Power 4 opponents in one fell swoop. That's the kind of stuff that builds you up and that can really propel you later on down the line, especially as we get into playoff discussion. So a very exciting slate across the country, but these mega matchups individually, incredible to watch. Texas, Ohio State doesn't need any Big Ten or SEC seasoning poured on it. That game's just fine all by itself. Same thing for Notre Dame, Miami, and quite frankly, Baylor, Auburn, I'd be happy with out talking about the conferences. But you add that into the mix, especially this time of college sports discussion, and it does add some extra ramifications for the bigger picture, both this season and then even beyond that into the coming years as well. So very excited about the possibilities that are out there, no matter what league you're in. And that even extends to, of course, the G5s, the Pac-2. They've got their own big stick games where they could swing and hit a home run and really have that be a big score for them. So for the Big 12 in particular, I ran them down first. I think they've got an incredible weekend potentially in store. Now, do I think Baylor's beating Auburn? No, I'm not picking them there. Do I think that since he's beating Nebraska? No, but I do like North Carolina over TCU. I do think Colorado's got a great crack at Georgia Tech, and I think Utah better absolutely beat UCLA, or my gosh, the comedy will just not ever stop when it comes to the Utes and their time in the Big 12. But on the other side of this, next week we'll revisit and see kind of what the conference records are coming out of this opening weekend with so many matchups. And of course, that will extend into next week as well when you get your Michigan versus OUs as a huge game and so on and so forth. But we did pick 5 games on the show this past week, and I will go ahead and throw those out there for you as far as the 5 biggest games in general. Very excited, of course, about Baylor and Auburn on Friday night. We'll be at that game. Construction in full swing for all of the pregame setups and everything else. You can feel that the population has risen a little bit in the last 24 hours or so. Some orange appearing a little bit more often, along with some Navy around stores and whatnot. I do like Auburn in this game, but Baylor's got a great chance. I like Texas over Ohio State and Columbus, although I don't feel super confident in that one. I feel like that's a coin flip, but I am taking the Longhorns because I just feel like they win these types of games more often than not. If this was a game at the end of the year, like we saw these two teams at the end of Texas' year last year, maybe I'm singing a different tune. But I like the Horns to go on the road and get a win with Arch Manning in Columbus. And imagine the hype now. Imagine what it'll be like after that one. I'm taking Miami over Notre Dame, even though that seems to be a pretty unpopular pick. Bama over Florida State seems to be trending with most of the general public. And then, yes, I am a believer, like many, in Cade Klubnik and the Clemson Tigers. So I'm taking them over LSU and what would be just a huge win for Dabo and company. But also going back to the original discussion, a big win for the ACC and the ACC SEC discussions that might occur later on. Same thing for a Bama and a Florida State, Big Ten SEC, Texas, Ohio State, Michigan, Oklahoma. These conversations are going to be out there. But now the great part about it is, unlike in the last few months with the offseason where you're just talking and talking and talking, we're going to have proof in the pudding. We're going to have real deal results, and we'll see who's actually bragging about things that matter, like real results, or who's defaulting to, I make more money, therefore I'm superior. These teams got to eventually roll the ball out there. The ball got rolled out last weekend, but now we are in full this weekend, and what a slate it is. Cannot wait for what's to come here in week one and for the weeks to come as well. This has been a smoke break, taking a little time to talk some college football, take a look at the weekend ahead and just the storylines each and every week. 15-minute shows is kind of what we're shooting for Tuesdays and Thursdays. Please hit that like button, that subscribe button. It's for a casual conversation a couple times each week where maybe you can kill some time or just make that trip a little bit more pleasant for a few minutes by riffing on some college football without trying to take it way too seriously. Fun is the name of the game after all, and the fun of college football is why we loved it to begin with. Until next time, I'm Craig Smoak, and this has been a Smoke Break with 365 Sports and Rogue Media.